Hi, my name is Javier Meier Borrani. You're watching the Jessica Fury podcast. Make sure to check it out every Monday as an episode drops then.
Welcome back to the podcast. Today we have Javier Meier Borrani. I got it?
Borrani. Very
Borrani.
close.
It's Italian.
Yes.
I wish I spoke Italian. Welcome to the podcast. Javier is an architect, and he is the founder and principal of RFRM Collective. Welcome to the podcast, Javier.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So your last name is Italian?
Yes, I have two last names.
I love
Meier
it.
Borrani.
Uh-huh.
Meier's German, Borrani's Italian. I was born in Germany, lived there 6 years, moved to Peru. My parents are Peruvian. And when I came to the U.S. at 12, they made me keep my two last names because in Peru, you always have two last names, your mother's and your father's. So when I came here, they said you have to keep the two. So I have two last names. It's Javier Meier Borrani.
Oh, that's cool. But you don't speak German.
I don't. I forgot it. I was fluent in it until 12 years old. I was speaking it in Germany, went to Peru to German private school, came to the U.S., and then had to learn English and forgot my German. Yeah.
And but you never learned Italian.
I never learned Italian.
What is your background of your parents? Did they enforce culture? Like, where is your background?
Yeah, so my dad's background is German and my mom's background is Italian. But both of their parents were born in Peru, so they're a couple generations removed. So my parents consider themselves Peruvian. And I've lived in 3 different countries, in Germany, Peru, and the U.S. So my life is definitely composed of a mixture of cultures, but predominantly Latin, Hispanic culture.
Is that how you were raised?
Yes. Yeah.
How did they raise you? Like, did they raise with certain traditions or certain cultures?
Yeah, I think a big part of it, and one of the things that I really miss about Latin America, South America, Latin cultures is this sense of community and family. I think that's huge in our culture. One of the reasons my mother wanted to move back to Peru with me when I was 6 was to introduce me to that culture where, we lived with my grandparents. I had tons of cousins in Peru, aunts. And there's this sense of, even my friends' parents were my uncles, right? My best friend's dad, I would call uncle. And there's just a sense of family. And so I think that's a big part of Latin culture. Yeah.
How was your upbringing, like, as a child, in that now it's put you in a place of creating your own business as an architect? And you were telling me the other day that you started this journey of architecture in high school. Was that something that during your high school years that you were working on something and you were like, I want to do this? Or was it something from your upbringing that you were really connected to that wanted you to take that creative path?
Yeah. I think that, I would encourage anybody and everybody to, if they can, to live in different parts of the world. I was lucky that I got that experience just because of my circumstances as a child. And that sort of worldview comes in later in my life in terms of being able to understand cultures, social situations a little better today as an adult. But, when I was younger, going back to kind of how I found architecture, I was going to high school in Downey High, graduated in 2007 from Downey High. And Downey had a drafting course that was provided to the students. And essentially you would pick a house, you would find a house on the internet, you would draft it by hand, the floor plans, the elevations, and then you'd build a physical model of that house. And you'd go to a competition and they would, basically score your model making skills. And in high school, I definitely struggled a lot. I mean, high school and middle school, even in college, when it came to education and classes and staying on track. But in this class, I completely immersed myself, right? There's something fascinating at that age to me about the ability to take a scale, right, and draw a 10-inch line and that 10-inch line has meaning in the real world, which would be, let's say, a 10-foot wall, right? And so that relationship between the scaled drawing, the intention that you put into a scaled drawing that then manifests in real life, that definitely caught my attention. So I pretty quickly became really invested in that class. And, I would finish my projects really quickly, and then other people in the class would pay me to do their drafting.
Oh.
So that was maybe my first business ever,
Mm-hmm.
but I would be doing the drafting for other kids in the class.
I wish I had that. Like, I wish when I was in high school, like, I had that connection to something that it's almost showing up in my life, like now. Like, I wasn't really in, I think actually more people now are not really into the curriculum of education with like art, or excuse me, like math and science. I don't really think that like that generation is really into that. I think they're more into like the arts or finding creativity or being entrepreneurs. And I mean, I'm sort of like into science, but more of like the neuroscience, not like the chemistry science. But as an architect, you're almost taking both of those things, like the science of something and the art of creating something. And I think that that's something so cool, because I didn't have that. I was just like, all right, I'm just going to do well, pass my class. But I think that's really cool. And how is it manifested from that time to where you are now?
Yeah. And just, again, to clarify, I think I struggled a lot through school, right? I guess maybe I was lucky that I found one thing that was relatively easy to me or that I was passionate about, but everything else was a huge struggle. But, I passed, right? I did okay.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, speaking of the relationship between art and science, in high school when I was taking that course, I really had no idea what architecture was. I just knew I liked what I was doing, but I also didn't know that what I was doing, which was drafting a floor plan and making a model, is 0.05% of what architecture really is, right? And so when I graduated high school, I knew I wanted to go to architecture school, and I applied to architecture schools, but I didn't get into any. And I was talking to family about it, and they all said, well, the best way for you to transfer majors is to be in the school that you want to attend already in another major and then try to transfer in. So that's what I did. I ended up getting into Cal Poly Pomona for civil engineering, and I thought that the architecture program there was good. So I said, okay, well, let me start civil engineering there and transfer in. Oh my God, civil engineering was so hard.
Mm-hmm. I was like, oh my God, he's so smart.
It was so hard. I took it for 1 year and I was really struggling. And through that year, I did a few things. One of them is I did a lot of research on how you actually get into an architecture school, which is you develop a good portfolio, artistic portfolio. And two, you got to keep your grades high, right? So struggling in a civil engineering program was not giving me a good art portfolio or helping me keep my grades high. So what I ended up deciding to do is dropping civil and then going to a community college to their architecture program. And I was there for 2 semesters, built up a portfolio, got good grades, right, and then applied to architecture school. I also ended up deciding to only apply to USC. I think USC at the time provided a great balance between theory and practice. And you can maybe, that also goes into this discussion about art and science, right? Where the theory of architecture is about, how do we live? What should cities look like, right? What is the purpose of architecture? How can architecture affect people? And then the practice is, how do you put a building together, right? What does the foundation do? How do you attach, the wood wall to the foundation? How do you waterproof a window, right? That's the practice. How do you manage a firm? How do you develop contracts? So I thought at the time USC brought the perfect kind of mix between the two. And so I ended up applying to USC, and I ended up getting in. Unfortunately, at the time, I was still on a visa here in the U.S., and so USC or the government would not give me financial aid. So I had to take a year off until the next year, waiting and hoping that my green card would come in before the next year. And it did come in 2 weeks before the year started. So I was able to go to USC, tell them, hey, I've got my green card, and then they gave me financial aid. The government gave me financial aid, and that's when I started architecture school in 2010. And at USC, that's where, right, you get immersed into this world, of academia, where you sort of figure out that architecture is so much more, right? It wasn't just drawing a floor plan or, having the understanding of how scales work, or building a physical model, right? You begin to realize that there is all kinds of other things that architecture does and can do.
Yeah, no, and it's interesting because, and I'll use the word immersed because I'm loving that right now. I've immersed myself into the love of building and architecture. And as someone who is on a new venture in real estate, I like and I dislike architecture. I dislike the architecture that's very linear, and it's just how my mind thinks. And even like going into certain houses sometimes, Javier, like I went to this house yesterday and the guy was like, "What do you think of it?" And I was like, I just don't get it. I just don't get it. And I think sometimes things are just done arbitrarily. And I think that sometimes like it does differentiate the difference between like, and I'll just say it, like good architects and somebody who's just putting a house together. And do you notice that? Or is it just me being someone who's sort of immersing themselves into like something, a love, a passion, like building a home is, so I'll just say like it's such a turn on, just the process of it. But I think that like sometimes, and I'm not going to say realtors or developers or builders, I mean, it can even be all as a whole. Like sometimes I'm just like this is not put together correctly, or this is put together so beautifully. And what is something that you've seen that is both beautifully put together and the steps that somebody is taking to put something beautiful together? And we'll use a home as an example.
Yeah, no, that's a great observation. I think that's part of how, most people who begin to be interested in the built environment, in developing, in design, begin to notice these things, right? Because you begin to be more attuned to it. There's definitely such a thing as good architecture and bad architecture. There's also a big debate about what is architecture, what do you call architecture, and what do you call a building, but that's a whole different conversation. But I think, I walk into spaces all the time, and I'm constantly kind of looking up, looking down, looking at the details, looking at the corner, using the door, trying to figure the building out. And just stepping back a little bit, right? As an architect, I can definitely bring value in that front end planning, right? For a client or for a developer, in terms of trying to make sure that these spaces are appropriately scaled, right? One good example is, I remember I lived in Redondo Beach for about 3 years, and I remember there was an open house for some new construction there. And I sneaked in because it was still kind of under construction, so I wanted to check it out. So I sneaked in, and it was horrendous. I know, and those houses were going to go for $900, over $1 million, right? But they had rooms that were 10 by 10 with 15-foot ceilings, right? Just because a high ceiling is fancy, and and you just felt like you were in this weird vacuum, right? Scale is so important, right? And these are things that you learn in architecture school, but you also learn through practice. The scale of spaces are important. The hierarchy of spaces is important too. Modern homes and these, you mentioned kind of these straight linear lines. Maybe I think you're referring to very rigid modern homes. Maybe
It's almost like a box.
Yeah, it's almost like a box.
If somebody's trying to really like look at it, what we're talking about, like it's almost like a box.
Right, a white box, right?
Yeah.
A white box, straight, rigid, one ceiling height, right? Every space is open to the other space, right? Open floor plans. That type of design doesn't allow for a variety of experiences and moods in the user, right? I think it's important for us as designers, developers, architects to think about what does each space need to do for the person, right? Not every space needs to have a 10-foot ceiling, 12-foot ceiling, 15-foot ceiling. Maybe the great room does, right? The main room, right, where you entertain. But there might be a library in the project, and you probably don't need a 15-foot ceiling, right? Maybe the library can be a little bit lower, a little bit warmer, right? Also the tones within the wall. So there's different things that you can do within the world of proportions. I think Frank Lloyd Wright, was an architect who talked a lot about compression and release. So he would always lower the ceilings of the transitionary spaces, like a hallway, right? So that when you were in that space, you'd subconsciously want to move out of it into a different space, whether it was the kitchen or the living room or something else that had higher ceilings. So playing with that even helps, right? So the subconscious is really important in design, not just, like we put a really expensive stone on the wall and we made it 15 feet high, right? That doesn't make it good architecture, right? It's about kind of that experience.
Yeah, I think that's where I've started to really, I like fine detail. I like the more detail I know, the more that I know. I may not necessarily walk into a room and be like, okay, well, this room that we're in right now is 1,500 square feet. This living room is, after you've been in enough, then you have an idea. But I think that the fine detail of certain finishes, certain stones, and I think that is where like my love of like real estate has really connected me. But I just think that a lot of times people who are either selling homes or building homes or developing homes, and they're not, sometimes they are thinking of those things, but sometimes they're just like, let's just put it together and throw a price tag based off of cost, because that's one thing, and making money, instead of like beautifying something, if that even is a word, like making it so beautiful that it's so attractive and you want something unique. And when I connect to selling homes, I want to sell something that's unique.
Yeah.
And it's unique. And I know that there's a lot of developers and builders who do build homes that they're exceptional, but I know it's their home. I walk in and I'm like, oh, this is so-and-so's, or this is so-and-so's, or I don't know this person, but I know that this is their brand, because every room is the same, every fixture is the same, everything is the same. And I think that a lot of people are not cultured in architecture. And it's both fortunate and unfortunate, because most people just want to buy a home and it looks pretty and have a bunch of people over and it looks great. And then you have people that are really sophisticated and they want that extra. They want to be in their library or their study and then move the energy. That's the way that I heard what you were saying, like shift the energy from this room that I'm in, even though it may be like a darker, warmer space, into something that's a little bit more vibrant, like a kitchen. And did that come from your experience of being cultured, or was it something that you continued to learn? And what were those things that you started to really apply to your own business?
Yeah. And I think, right, the understanding of programming, we can call it, in our industry we call it programming, right, which is arrangement of spaces. How do they kind of relate to each other? Um, you're taught a lot of this in school, but really where you begin to develop your understanding of it is through practice, right? Is trial and error. As an architect, you start designing, you think it's going to be a certain way on paper, but by the way, to get to whatever is going to get built, you've gone through 50 iterations before that, right? So you're constantly iterating. That's design, the design process, the creative process. So it takes time too, right? We have to be able to bake in some time in the front end with the client to be able to go through 40, 50, 30, 20 iterations of a floor plan to make sure that we get it just right. But even the first floor plans projects I designed and build, go to the site and realize, this is what it's like to, whatever I drew, this is what manifests, right? And I learned from that as well. And one of the things that I've been told repeatedly by people within my profession, older architects, is, architecture, in architecture, you probably won't really figure out who you are as an architect until 10 years into your career, plus or minus. It takes about 10 years until after you've started practicing to really kind of get in touch with your style, with your way of thinking, with your way of designing. And then you figure out who you are in this world, right? And then you're going to practice for another 30 years. And by the time you're 50, 40, that's when you become a good architect, right? That's when you've that's when you've built enough homes, enough buildings to be able to say, oh, I know what I'm doing. So architecture is one of those professions that is for the long term completely, right? There's no instant fame in this world, right? You're just slowly but surely putting one brick at a time, right? And then when you're in your 40s, 50s, you say, oh, there's a wall I've been building, right? And you can stand on it.
Mm-hmm.
So it takes a long time to develop that sensibility.
What inspires you?
I think that architecture is endlessly diverse. I think that as an architect, especially as a owner of a practice, I am dealing with a million different aspects of a house. That's, we're talking a lot about the house, right? You're dealing with the design, right, which is interesting, fun. But designing a house is only maybe 5-10% of the project, right? You're dealing with the city, politics, codes, law. You're dealing with a client. You're dealing, their sensibilities, their needs. You're dealing with a contractor. You're dealing with consultants, right? You're dealing with budgets. You're dealing with all these things that work together to hopefully create a piece of architecture. And also, it's a long process, right? That's one of the main things that I love about it, is that it is a relationship that you're going to have for years, right? Designing, permitting, building a house is going to take 3 years. So you're actually engaging all of these people for 3 years, and you're having to foster these relationships, right? They're partnerships.
Mm-hmm.
That to me is beautiful, right? And then you have several of those, and then you keep building upon those. So I love the slowness of it. I love the fact that I can't just get a client or a project, bust it out in 2 weeks, a month, and then forget, right? And then move on to the next client and the next one and the next one and the next one, right? I have to put in, I'm putting all of myself into every single one of these projects, because these are long-term relationships. So I love that component of it. Mm-hmm. There are other things that inspire me. I think from school and even today, I think a lot about the social, political, and economic forces that shape our society. I think that architecture, the built environment, has a lot to do with it. So I think a lot about that as well. And many times I'm disillusioned. I do end up finding that economics drives most of what we do in our society here.
Yeah, And now it's going to just continue to drive it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see that all the time.
But the social and the political still inspire me within that world. What are the effects buildings can have in terms of making us live better lives?
Mm-hmm. Sometimes I try to look at the economic standpoint as something positive and something that I can connect to in a way of service and be like, okay, I can work with a specific client and help them find what they're looking for or build something that they're looking for, and I can just focus on creating this economical value for them and however long they choose to have this home. But I want to just use like a specific example because there's a lot of realtors or builders or developers that a lot of people work with in my industry. And we know someone mutually, and the builder and Javier have this beautiful project that they're working on. They're building this, and please correct me if I'm wrong, it's a home in Pacific Palisades, and it's going to be 8,200 square feet. Yes. Yep. Okay. And I mean, I know it's going to be beautiful because I know the builder and I know the work that he does and the craft that he does. And when you were sharing about, this long term of 10 years and 20 years, my first thought was, the opportunity to build with this person is so remarkable for your career because that it's showing your value. This particular builder is not going to just take someone because it just seems right. Now, can you share a little bit about that specific home that you're building and how you put that together, where you went into the area of the Pacific Palisades to study the site, putting the budget aside, but what were the certain factors that came into play when you're putting together those blueprints, that project?
Yeah, no, thank you for bringing that up. And, I do want to say I think I've been very fortunate through my career to have several people, much older than me, and I think notice something and say, hey, I want to work with you, I want to help you. And, these are people in my life that, have influenced me quite a bit. And this person is one of them, that we mutually know. I think, with this project in particular, and maybe I can talk a little bit about the relationship between the architect and the contractor, because it's a very important one as well. Oftentimes architects will design a little bit in a vacuum, and they will design, they will draw, they will permit, and then a contractor comes in, bids the project, and says, hey, we're over budget, right? The client says, why are we over budget? Okay, well, let's reduce the budget, and then you're starting to slice and cut and maybe even, mess up the project, right? Now, with this particular contractor who introduced me to these clients, he's actually been involved from day one, since the beginning of design. And that has actually been an incredible collaboration as the architect and with a contractor, because we're able to design a project that, one, is going to be feasible in terms of detailing and building methods, right? Because that's the expertise that the contractor is bringing in. Two, we're beginning to watch the budget really early on and are able to shift the design as needed to make sure that we are hopefully meeting the budget that we need to hit for the client. And at the end of the day, you get a better project, right? If there's a contractor involved early on in the process with the architect. This particular project in the Palisades is for a young couple, maybe in their 40s, with 2 kids, and they wanted to build their dream home. They had very particular ideas about what the exterior of the home should look like. They wanted a very traditional style, and then the interior was to be a little bit more flexible, a little bit softer, maybe a little bit more modern.
Not to interrupt you, traditional like white stucco or traditional
a brick, like
farmhouse?
like a brick house. It's a Georgian colonial style.
Okay.
So it's, your sort of brick rectangle,
Oh.
and the doors in the center,
Mm-hmm.
and then you have equal windows on each side.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very symmetrical project.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's actually been one of the most interesting projects for me to design, because I was brought up in especially my education, but in the modernist era, right? The white cube, the white rectangle,
Mm-hmm.
is what I was taught to design, as a modernist.
Mm-hmm.
And so diving into a traditional home has been an incredibly enriching experience, and I'm actually looking forward to doing more traditional homes, because there is a lot of rules that you have to follow, right? In some of these more traditional classical styles. In modernism, right, you make your volumes, you have your room, and if you just need to shift a window, I don't know, 2 feet to the right and reshape it because that's how it works better on the interior, you just do it, right? There's no set of rules from the exterior that dictates that. But with a house like a Georgian colonial style house, it's all symmetry, right? You have to have your door right at the center of the volume, and then you have to have equal windows on each side, and those windows have to be equally spaced and equally sized. So now you're starting from the outside in, right? You have a shell, certain rules and factors that you have to accommodate for, and then you're designing the interior around those. For that project, we probably went through, I would say, 50, 60 iterations of the floor plan with the clients.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's a lot of iterations.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah.
What is the average?
It depends on,
A developer, ballpark.
2, 3, 4, 5. I don't know.
Yeah.
Something
I
like
mean,
that.
that's what I was going to say, like 5, 6, 10.
And these iterations, by the way, some of them are drastic. A lot of them are small tweaks, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where we're really trying to make sure that every space functions exactly in the way that the client needs,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Oh, sorry. I was going to add, but I thought you were going to say something. But did you go to the area of the Pacific Palisades to look at the area before you started to do that? Like, do you scope out the area? Do you look at what you're working with? Or does the builder say, okay, my clients, they purchased, 123 Main Street, and this is it. This is the lot size. And now there's 2 parts to this question. The second one would be, do you pull an underbuild, or are you doing your own?
I'm sorry, repeat that last question.
Are you pulling the underbuild? Is that what it's called?
Oh, the as builds, or
Yeah.
the underbuild. Okay, yes, we've talked about that before. Maybe I'll backtrack a little bit. There's 2 ways I start to get involved with the project. In this scenario, the owners had already owned the property. They'd been living there for a while, and they were ready to demo the existing house and rebuild.
Okay.
So in that scenario, yes, I'm called in and told, here's the site, here's the address, right? A different scenario, which I've done in the past as well, is I've had future clients hire me to consult on them purchasing a property to build a house, right? So while they're on the market for a property, they're looking at all kinds of properties, and when a few of them interest them, they'll call me, they'll send me the address, and then either I'll meet them there and tour the property with them, and then go back and do a quick hour or 2 of research for them. And this is because in LA, you're paying a lot of money for any property, really, sometimes just for a piece of dirt, right, because the house needs to be demoed. And some of these properties are very complex and tricky, right? There's a lot of codes and regulations around what you can or cannot do on a property. And so these clients hire me at the kind of searching and purchasing process because they want to be able to know ahead of time, before they put in a bid, what is the maximum that I could build here? What are my options on this property, right? I think, there's all kinds of new laws with ADUs and SB 9 where you can subdivide a property and build additional homes on it. And it can get a little confusing, right? And sometimes the information that is listed or you're being given is not quite accurate, right? Because it hasn't gone through kind of a deeper research process. So maybe to help them really understand what the potential of that property is before they put in a bid or purchase the home, right? So at that point, yes, I'm going out and I'm looking at sites with them until, one of them hits, and then they hire me to design the home on that property. But once the property is located, or it's acquired, or in the case of the Palisades project, they already own it, I do go out there as well to understand the context, right? What are we designing? What's around this property? What are we designing towards or for? Or you want to make sure that a building fits within its context, right? It doesn't want to stand out completely like a sore thumb. It wants to stand out because of its exceptional design, but it needs to be able to speak to its surrounding context as well.
And the surrounding context is the homes?
In this case, it's the homes, right? It's other homes.
I mean, I run that area. I know that area very well because I live in that area. So I just like to observe like a lot of the homes that are in that area. I'm like a white stucco person. Like I love clean. I like the look to be as clean as possible. But what is a mistake that you notice developers, I wouldn't necessarily say builders, maybe potentially realtors that are working on the development side? What are some mistakes or certain things that they can avoid doing when developing a new home or developing a new project?
So I think that it's a good question. I think one thing I would like to, are we saying here that the realtor is acting as a developer, or are they two kind of separate entities where there's a realtor that's, looking at potential development properties and then selling it to a developer? I guess I'm trying to understand.
Let's do that, because I do know some friends of mine that they do buy and flip.
Yeah.
But let's just go off of that. Let's do.
What was the name of that the thing that you said? That
Underbuild?
The underbuild. Okay.
Right, because you and I were working together for a client of mine, and I was going to pull an underbuild, and you went ahead and did something else.
Right, which what I would call it is a feasibility study.
Oh,
and
okay.
I think in essence they're the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not 100% sure how an underbuild works, whether it's an actual human making it or it's a computer just pulling.
It's just $75.
So it's probably just a computer pulling in, information from the internet, right?
Yes.
And
Yes,
giving
yes,
us
yes.
seven. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, for me, the underbuild is a little bit more deep, right? Where I'm actually sitting down, I'm gathering the same exact information that underbuild would give you, but then I'm analyzing it. I'm comparing it to the building code, to the zoning code, to any specific plans that might be overlaid, to any ordinances that exist that might affect the project. And then I'm trying to give you a much more realistic picture of what can actually be built, right? So I think to that point, one of the mistakes is not doing that deeper dive early on, right, on the feasibility of the project or the property, where you're relying on, just maybe some information that gets pulled from the internet, or just kind of your common knowledge about what you could do,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's a lot of tricky things within hillside properties, for example,
Mm-hmm.
which is the property we were looking at,
Mm-hmm.
Where your buildable area, right, it's say you have a 15,000 square foot lot, but it's a hillside. Your buildable area, meaning how big your house can be, is determined by a survey that gets done called the slope band analysis, that
Mm-hmm.
analyzes the steepness of all of the slopes on your property, averages them all out, and then you get a square footage. That's
Mm-hmm.
your maximum square footage,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if somebody out there is saying, hey, it's a 15,000 square foot lot and you can build a 10,000 square foot house and it's a hillside property, I would question that number if they haven't done the proper analysis of the topography to determine what your true buildable area is, right?
Yeah, and I would probably just piggyback off of what you're saying, because my initial thought as I was listening is like, I'm an observer. I like to observe. I'll observe what someone's saying to me first before I respond. I think it has to do because I'm a meditator, and meditation requires you to observe, constantly observe what's going on, observe. So I think that I've developed that skill of being very observant. So I observe, I'll use that word again, a lot of realtors that they have developers and they work and they say, or they have, I don't know, it's none of my business, but they have these developers because everyone's trying to make some money and everyone wants to be on the listing side. That's what it is. That's what we were talking about the other day, is that like people want to be on the listing side of it, find the space, bring a developer, build the thing. Let's do this in 3, 4, 5 months, turn over and sell it. Mm-hmm. And that's what a lot that goes on in the real estate world. And what I've learned, and I'm sharing this because I think that somebody listening to this could be really helpful, is that to work on the relationship, and you use the word collaboration before, which I absolutely love because it is a collaboration. It's not like, here's the property, I'm going to just wait until the listing opens up. But I think it's more of like, know the information that is needed that can really help you with working with the developer or the architect, like having all those questions answered for the potential client and the builder, developer, architect. What is the land that we're working on? What street is it on, the Palisades? I'm using that as an example. What are the homes around? Like having those specifics makes it easier for your job. And I'll speak for myself as like a realtor. That's what I've had to learn, where people are like, okay, what's this? And I'm like, well, I don't know though. Like, go figure out all that information before you're even going to present it to a developer. Because a developer is just going to be like, I need to know all these things before I move to the next step, before I moving on to wanting to build this. And I know that people aren't really into this wanting to build, wanting to flip, wanting to build, wanting to flip. Now, when someone's doing renderings and they're selling a home with the renderings, are you developing the renderings? Is the architect developing the renderings? How is that?
Yeah, and just to go back to your previous point really quickly, I think that a good seasoned developer would probably be able to do the same analysis to some degree that I could do on a property, mm-hmm. in terms of understanding its true feasibility. I think it's a little bit more important when you're talking to, or the person who's potentially purchasing the property is not in that world, right? When it's maybe a private client, maybe they have purchased 2 or 3 homes in their lifetime, but now are looking to purchase a property and build their brand new home. They might not quite know what is the true feasibility there. But yeah, a seasoned developer should be able to do a pretty similar analysis as I would do, right, mm-hmm. in terms of feasibility. A lot of times developers and architects do work together, in that as well. That mm-hmm. collaboration happens as well, because the developer is much better at looking at the finances and pro forma of a project. And then I'm much more, capable of doing the deep feasibility, right? And the two speak to each other, mm-hmm. and are continually informing each other, right? Mm-hmm. The feasibility tells you one thing, it feeds into the pro forma. Pro forma spits something out. It says, hey, we need to modify this and this and this. Goes back to the feasibility mm-hmm. and mm-hmm. the volume and the massing mm-hmm. and back and forth. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to the design process, renderings, how do you sell a project before it's built, right? So architects will work very differently when it comes to renderings and imagery. I myself do a lot of the imagery in-house. So we do all the 3D modeling, we do all the rendering, all the post-production. But there are ways to do it that are different, where you send your 3D model somewhere else to get it rendered, or you actually hire another company that 3D models your plans, your 2D plans, and then gives you the renderings. So there's many different ways to get renderings. Mm-hmm. Me, myself, in our office at the moment, We've also started to implement VR. So we're able to bring a client in to the office, put on the goggles, and they're able to walk through their house, entirely through VR, completely rendered out with materials and trims and door handles and all those things. And that's shown to be pretty successful in terms of allowing clients to understand the project that they're building. In addition to that, though, physical models, I still think, are the most successful out of all the communication tools for clients who are not seasoned at reading 2D drawings. Whenever we build the physical model, right, to scale,
That's pretty.
and they're able to lift it, look at it, right, they immediately understand it. And I think it has a lot to do with just our perception, right, our perception abilities within the world. But they look at that little model and say, yes, I get it. And then they begin to see a lot of things that they would not see through a rendering or an elevation or a floor plan, because those are much more difficult for them to read, right? They'll see the 3D model or the physical model and say, you know what, actually I think this window would be a little better over here, because that's where I sit, and and I need to have and here I'm talking about a commercial project, but I need to have a line of sight into my drive-through, things like that, right? So we always try to do 3D renderings, the VR, but a physical model as well.
Yeah.
Because they're also just beautiful.
Yeah, and I think it's because the more that you connect to your senses, like the more senses are involved, the more you're involved, the more emotional you get, more.
If you can touch it, right?
Yeah.
You're touching your new house or your new office building.
Yeah.
It's very direct.
How do you find balance in your day between doing this type of work? Because it requires a lot of, yes, mental focus, but creativity and expanding your creative mind, and also then having to understand the emotions and creativity of your client. But how do you find balance in your day?
What makes you think I found balance in my day?
Well, it's a repetition for me, finding daily balance within everything that I do. But I'm always so enthralled with individuals like yourself who have lines of work that creatively expand their mind to a place that's far beyond something linear.
Right.
It's so cool. Like, that's the easiest way to say it. It's like, it's just very cool. But is there a balance? Is there an other side of it? Is there a balance to it, or it's just so norm?
Yeah, no, so me personally, one of the reasons I think I also wanted to start my own practice is because it's difficult for me to keep focus on one thing for too long. So the shifting of tasks throughout a day, meaning going from a creative exercise for an hour to dealing with billing, to dealing with client needs, to dealing with HR things, to coming back to this, right? That kind of process for me works really well. Now within that I have to bake in exercise, I have to bake in eating well, right? I have to bake in times of silence. I have to bake in finding time to read a book or, look at design magazines. And I think for all of us, and I'm sure for you as well, it's always a process. Me personally, I find myself getting into a routine that's working pretty well, and then it breaks down. Something happens, and I lose I lose the rhythm, and it breaks down, and I kind of go into a little bit of a chaos, and then I have to rebuild it. And it's just the way that I'm built, I think. But I always come back, right? I always try to find that rhythm again. But I definitely am completely invested in what I do, so I'm constantly thinking about it, nights, mornings, weekends. And so, I do think eventually I'll have to probably find some better boundaries there.
Or maybe you won't.
Or maybe I won't. But
like maybe you just won't.
Yeah.
Maybe it'll just continue to work and evolve for you. Javier, I am so grateful that you were able to sit down, not because I got to just have so much more knowledge, but even to help those who are looking to do this line of work or involved with the building process. I mean, I certainly am, but I had to be selfish and have you on the podcast. But I like to ask my guests 3 questions before that I leave. And one of them you started to share, but what is a non-negotiable in your day that sets you up for your entire day, whether it's work related or personal related?
It's an interesting one. You know, me personally, I've actually been going through a little bit of a change personally in the last 2, 3, 4 weeks in terms of trying to readjust myself on some things. But at this point, it has definitely become the exercise, but it's really the post-exercise, which includes the steam room, the sauna, and a cold shower. And those, and you know, steam room and sauna can be interchangeable, but those 2 things after a workout make my day work really well, right? Especially the first half of it. I don't need caffeine. I don't need anything, right? I just sit down, I focus, I get my hard stuff done. Then the second half of the day is a little looser. But yeah, it's the exercise and then the hot and cold right after that.
Yeah. I haven't gone the cold plunge route. Like I don't have a cold plunge. I have cold plunge. I do try to jump in a cold shower every morning, but I ice roll.
Yeah.
I put ice on my face in the morning because I don't know.
It's amazing what it does.
If you were just starting out in your business, what would be a piece of advice that you would give yourself from where you are now to where you started?
Yeah, I would say focus a little more on what it is that you are interested in and want to get out of the business, and never lose sight of that. I think for me, I was so busy trying to build a business, grow a business, stabilize a business, that I lost a little focus on where is it exactly that I want to go. I'm currently 5 years after establishing my practice, trying to refocus that and really go after it. But I think if you're always keeping that as your goalpost, you'll hopefully and most likely end up there. So don't lose sight of what it is that interests you about what you're doing, because you can get caught up in the day-to-day and lose that perspective.
Yeah, I like that. What are 3 qualities of yourself peers would say about you?
I don't know.
Really? I mean, I would.
I think they would say, I don't know. I don't want to speak.
I would say that Javier is. I want to say intelligently in tuned in with each and every part of a project, a conversation. You're so there, you're so connected to it in every possible way. And it takes sometimes, I think, a lot of like your own intellectual capacity to just immerse yourself. And I'm using that again into what somebody's sharing with you. And that requires a lot of, and I'll say patience. You have a sense of patience. And I think that your business probably requires that patience, being patient with having to do this 50 or 60 times. And I would probably say you're very unique. You're exceptionally unique, and I love unique. Javier, thank you so much for being here and for your time. You can plug yourself, or you can just say la vie.
Yes, no, thank you for having me. Great conversation. It's gone by so quickly. Again, I'll just say, I'm an architect. I run RFRM Collective, and we're a small practice here in the Arts District of Los Angeles.
Yeah, he's amazing, guys. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here, and follow the podcast. See you soon.